Hey everybody, welcome back to Body System Summit. This is week 2, and this week we are going to be talking about those accessory organs of the digestive system that I mentioned last week, which will be the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So you should all have a copy of the presentation in your email, but I'm going to pull it up on the screen so you can follow along. All right, so we will just go ahead and get to it. So as we learned last week, we talked a lot about digestion, how it's kind of a complicated, very intricate process with a lot of steps. So while it's doing a lot of work, it also needs support from these auxiliary organs. So this is where the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas come in. So these organs rely on one another to function properly. So not only does the digestive system rely on these guys, but they also rely on each other. They're kind of like a little team. So adequate digestion relies on secretions from these organs for us to break down, absorb, and metabolize our nutrients. Another thing to be aware of is that we are exposed to toxins on a daily basis, and toxin is a very broad term. This could be any number of things. We talked a little bit about toxins and xenobiotics last week, but we unfortunately can't avoid our exposure to them. They happen on a daily basis and they are increasing in our environment. So the liver has to do a lot of this. It has to bear the brunt of a lot of this work. And so what can happen is that the liver becomes overwhelmed and they're not able to properly manage all of these toxins that are coming at us. And then when the liver gets overworked, the gallbladder can't function properly either because the gallbladder sort of starts to pick up some of the slack. So this is what I mean when I say that the organs kind of work as a team and they kind of rely on each other to be working properly, because if one is impaired in some way, another will be working a little harder to try to compensate. Toxic load is something that's often overlooked in medicine, but there are ways that you can determine your toxic load. There are tests that can be done for this sort of thing. It's just not something you would get as part of like a regular medical workup. So for example, one example is heavy metals. Heavy metals are something that has to be processed by the liver. We're talking aluminum, mercury, lead, cadmium are the big four. So this is something that you can easily get tested for. So just to kind of give you some examples of those toxins, also things that we're breathing in our environment, things that we're drinking in our water, things that are in our cosmetics and our household products. You guys might have heard about the term PFAS, PFAS. They're calling them the forever chemicals. And these are chemicals that very slowly break down and are very difficult to metabolize by the liver. And so they tend to accumulate in the body, and that will contribute to the overall toxic load. So those are just some examples. So just to do a little anatomy here, the liver is on the right side of the body under the rib cage. All right, so it's kind of high up there. You have a left and a right lobe, and they're separated by a fun little term called the falciform ligament. Runs right up the middle. So that's this guy right here, this kind of thick piece here. There are thousands of little cell clusters called hexagon triads. So each one of those little hexagon triads has a vein, an artery, and a bile duct. All right, and I'm going to show you a little cross section of these here in a second. But the majority of the blood that comes to the liver comes from the digestive tract. Okay, so this is really important to touch on, that most of the blood supply that the liver gets relies on the digestive tract having adequate blood supply as well. And so once the liver comes through from the digestive tract, it's filtered by the liver, and then it leaves through what's called the inferior vena cava. So that's kind of how you can think of the liver. It's like our filter system, our filtration system. And then the blood is moving from the central vein into the hepatic vein in the center of these little hexagon clusters, like I was just talking about, through these little sinus cavities. So you have sinus cavities in your liver just like you have in your head. Okay, so similar structure. Your liver cells are called hepatocytes, and these will adjust circulating nutrient levels, kind of depending on what's needed. All right. The coolest thing to me about the liver, or rather one of the coolest things about the liver, because there's a lot of cool things, it can regenerate its own cells. It's the only organ in the body that can do this. So in other words, if you have an injury, let's say you get in a car accident, God forbid, or you get cancer in one part of your liver, or maybe even certain types of liver disease like hepatitis, it could just damage one lobe or one section of the liver. So you could remove that section, take it out of the body, and it will grow back. So I just think that's the coolest thing ever. So that really tells you what an amazing little organ it is, and not to mention how critical it is. So, I mean, to me, that speaks to its necessity in the body, the fact that it can grow itself back. Just really amazing. So this is kind of a close-up of these hexagon clusters, or the hepatic lobules, what they're called. So there's kind of a picture of what it looks like from the top. So you can see, again, there's thousands of these kind of packed together, but this is sort of a cross section. So you've got all these are the little sinusoid cavities. This is the central vein. So this is one of the main blood supplies. This is the blood supply. This would leave the liver and go towards the heart, okay? And then this is your bile duct. So this is one of the channels through which the liver secretes into the digestive tract. So you don't really need to know all of this on a very scientific level, but I think part of understanding your body systems is kind of having a basic understanding of the structure of that organ and kind of what it looks like and how things are flowing through. So the primary roles of the liver, I've already mentioned filtration. So it's literally your filter system. Okay, so anything that goes into your body has to go through the liver, and particularly anything that's ingested. So anything you eat or drink, but also things you inhale or things that come through the skin or whatever. The liver's got to do. So again, big job. It secretes bile, and bile aids in the digestion of fats. Okay, the liver also secretes other enzymes that help you digest fat as well. Okay, so the liver's main nutritional function in that sense, or in its digestive function, is that digestion of fats. And then finally, detoxification. So what the liver does is it basically takes any toxic compounds that come into the body, it takes them apart, it kind of like disassembles them and neutralizes them so that it can be removed. It's a two-step process, which I'll give you guys a little more detail on, but this is basically deconstructing these toxins and making them into something that are no longer harmful for us. If it can't make them not harmful for us, it gets them out as quickly as possible, okay? So one of those two things will occur. Other roles include fat storage. So if you ever have to rely on your fat stores for survival, they will be coming from your liver. Primarily, it produces cholesterol, which is a big scary word, but I'm going to talk about why that's not necessarily the case. It makes glycogen for use as a backup fuel. So glycogen is again kind of like a storage, it's like stored energy. So in the event that for some reason you're not able to get food for some period of time, like in our ancestral days, it was the winter season where food was a little more scarce. We have glycogen to help keep us alive so that we don't starve to death. There are nutrients that will be stored for later use in the liver. So things like vitamin A, vitamin D, B12, iron. Okay, so again, it's either used as backup or it's just for when they're needed. Like you may ingest some vitamins that your body's like, yeah, I've used all that I need for the day. And anything that's left over goes into like this little warehouse kind of in the liver. The liver helps with hormonal balance. One point to also remember is that toxins sometimes can occur from within ourselves. So for example, having too much estrogen produces a type of toxicity. So the liver will help eliminate anything endogenous, which means anything from inside our body that may be in too high of levels. And so estrogen is one of those things. It also makes certain proteins like albumin, and it makes immune factors. So there are some types of immune proteins and things that are made by the liver. So as you can see, it wears a lot of different hats and has a lot of really big jobs. Now, dysfunctions of the liver, kind of on the flip side. The first is hepatitis, which literally just means inflammation of the liver. So anytime you see that word, the itis ending, that itis, that's an inflammation situation, okay? This can be caused by pathogens. This can be caused by diet. Drug and alcohol use can cause this. So you've probably heard about the different types of hepatitis. One is a food poisoning. Another is a sexually transmitted disease. And one transmitted through, like sharing drug needles, that sort of thing. And then there is alcoholic hepatitis, which is caused by chronic damage to the liver from drinking. Over time, this can become what's called cirrhosis. So if you don't treat the hepatitis and this inflammation persists, the cells of the liver become hard. And this is where the liver loses that ability to regenerate itself. The cells are not able to do that anymore. So this is cirrhosis. This is an irreversible condition. Okay, so hepatitis, most types of hepatitis are reversible. Cirrhosis, not reversible. Okay. Fatty liver disease is what you more commonly see, particularly in this country. You see a lot of fatty liver disease. So this is kind of like the warning sign that if you don't do something, you're going to get cirrhosis. Okay. So this is where fat deposits accumulate in the liver cells. There is alcoholic and non-alcoholic. So that's important to know. You can get non-alcoholic fatty liver, usually obesity related, certainly diet related. And then there's the alcoholic kind, which again develops from that chronic inflammation induced by alcohol. Hepatic steatosis is another name for that. So that's like the medical term is hepatic steatosis, but when your doctor is speaking to you about it, or when you hear it in more layman's terms, it's called fatty liver. So some signs of liver dysfunction, constipation could be one of them. And now I realize constipation has a lot of other implications, kind of like we talked about last week. So don't assume just because you're constipated that your liver is failing. Okay, don't jump immediately to that, but it can be a sign in combination with some of these other things. Fertility issues, because again, if you've got an imbalance of your hormones, if your estrogen is excessive, that could be affecting your ability to conceive, for example. Allergies and hay fever. So if you have a lot of allergies, if your stools are looking kind of weird, particularly like greasy or oily, or even like they have bubbles. This is kind of another reason, I think I mentioned this last week, that you need to be looking at your poop. And this is another reason why, because it can be very useful as a diagnostic of what is happening with your various elements of digestion. So if your stool looks like any of these things, this could mean that the liver is not making those enzymes to help you break down fats properly. If you're constantly fatigued or have general low energy, deficiency of any of these listed vitamins or iron. So A, D, E, and K are your fat soluble vitamins. Those are the ones that are mainly stored by the liver. So if they're not being stored, that's something to check out. Itching, especially around like the belly and back area. And I don't just mean like an occasional itch. I'm talking about regular continuous itching in those areas, because again, right around that liver area. Swelling in the belly area. So you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with the term beer belly, right? So that's part of what that is the liver is enlarged due to that constant hit, that constant damage from alcohol. Will cause the liver to become enlarged. It also causes that area to retain fluid. And so you get this big kind of hard belly. Some of that, yes, is also fat from the excess calories that alcohol is converted into fat, or stored as fat rather, but a lot of that is from the liver being enlarged. If you've had a diagnosis of metabolic syndrome, that has some liver implications. If you've had lab work done and they told you that your liver enzymes were elevated, that's definitely a sign of dysfunction. If it's really bad, you get jaundice, which is yellowing of the eyes or the skin. So that's like pretty advanced territory. That's not going to be an early warning sign. Your earlier warning signs would be some of these things on the left, and then these would be, some possibly more advanced things. Okay, so let's jump into the gallbladder. So the gallbladder is located just behind the right side of the liver. Okay, so it's like right behind it. Our body is kind of layered, right? It's very three-dimensional. So things are kind of stacked on top of each other and like nestled in. So the gallbladder is kind of right behind that left side of the liver. The gallbladder also secretes bile into the small intestine through the bile duct. And part of that, well, the main part of that is to break fats down into smaller particles. Okay, so you probably remember that I said that the liver makes bile. So it does, but then it sends it to the gallbladder. So it's the liver stores the bile and produces it, and then it goes through that bile duct. So the bile duct connects the gallbladder and the liver. So it's stored and then it's sent when it's needed. So bile is basically made of water, some acids, a protein called bilirubin, and fats. So let's think about this for a second, that bile needs fat to exist. So if we're not absorbing fat from our diet adequately, then it also stands to reason that we're also probably not making enough bile, or our bile is not going to have the right composition. So a vicious cycle kind of begins here, because then you don't have enough bile to break down your fat, and then you don't have enough fat to make bile, and so on. Excess bile is stored for later use. Its production is stimulated by a hormone called cholecystokinin. I know there's always some fun big words in here, so that's your big word of the day, cholecystokinin. And this is triggered by chyme production. If you guys recall last week, chyme is the paste that forms in the stomach from the food that you've chewed and swallowed. So chyme is that acidic paste from the stomach. So once that chyme is formed, then that hormone starts kicking in, and it tells the liver to make the bile to send to the gallbladder. Okay, so again, if you're not chewing your food properly, and you're not breaking it down properly in the stomach, you're already disrupting a hormonal signal that's needed down the line of other digestive processes. All right, so here is where we start connecting dots between what we've just learned, and you're going to see that every week. We're going to just keep building and building on these connections and these relationships. So functions of the gallbladder, I already mentioned, it stores bile for when meals are eaten. It also regulates the composition and concentration of bile. So the gallbladder helps to dictate what the bile is made of. It requires a certain ratio of water to other components, so that balance is important. It secretes the bile in a very controlled fashion. So it not only controls the concentration and the composition, but also the timing or the rate at which it's released. It also helps to drain some of the waste products from the liver into that top section of the small intestine, the duodenum. All right. And then it also transports that bile and enzymes from the pancreas into the duodenum. So again, here is where we see how three of these organs are sort of working together. Some potential problems of the gallbladder, and then the signs. Gallstones are pretty common. You've all probably heard of this before. This is basically so gallstones are made of bile. They're made of bile that hardens before it can be used. And so it turns into these little like crystally looking stones. This can be due to various things. Number one is hidden food allergies, inadequate stomach acid, all right, constant state of stress, and poor liver function. Because again, if the stomach isn't getting the proper signals to the gallbladder, if the liver isn't sending the bile at the right time or the right, the right concentration, any of that, there's a problem here. Cholecystitis. So again, there's that itis word. So remember, itis is always inflammation. So this is inflammation of the gallbladder. Treatment is usually to just take it out. The gallbladder is an organ you can live without, but it can lead to all kinds of problems. And so people don't necessarily get relief by having their gallbladder removed. It usually starts leading to other problems like malabsorption and maldigestion, particularly of fats. So all of my patients that I work with who have had their gallbladders out, I always recommend that they take digestive enzymes to help basically compensate for the fact that they don't have those enzymes coming from the gallbladder. And this tends to be very helpful with their digestive symptoms, their stools, etc. But the liver pretty much has to compensate. So again, the liver is a very resilient organ, but it's already got a lot of its own work to do. So this would be like if your coworker quit and then you start having to do your job and your coworker's job. That's a very comparable analogy. Okay, so the liver is working way overtime. So signs of gallbladder issues could be moderate to severe pain under the rib cage, specifically under the right side of the rib cage. If you get pain radiating to your upper back of your shoulder that you can't determine to be muscular or some other obvious cause, any number of digestive symptoms, including severe abdominal pain, nausea or queasiness, vomiting, a lot of belching, a lot of gas. Typically, this will happen right after a big meal, especially if that meal is high in fat. Some people have it at night when they lie down to go to sleep. Okay, so if you're having like if you're eating a large meal or a very fatty meal and you start having these types of symptoms, your gallbladder might be mad at you, okay? And then again, those oily, greasy, kind of fatty looking stools. So very important to monitor what is coming out of your body, just like what's going in. All right, so let's move on to the pancreas. So the pancreas is, it lies flat behind the stomach, so it's a very flat organ. And it goes all the way across. So it goes to the left and the right side of the abdomen over to the spleen on the left. So the pancreas has multiple ducts that empty into that small intestine, all right? And the main pancreatic ducts conjoin with the common bile duct. So like I was saying before, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas are all connected together through these ducts, all right? This is the main part of the pancreas right here. This is what they call the head of the pancreas. Here's your gallbladder. So the gallbladder sort of like, see how it's kind of like plopped on top? It kind of like hangs over the top of it. Here's the duct that comes from the liver. And then here's that common bile duct, which connects all three of the organs. But it has a head, a body, and a tail. And the cells that produce digestive enzymes are called acinar cells. All right. Any enzymes that aren't needed at the time are stored in these little granules called zymogen granules. Okay, so they'll kind of hang out until they're needed, basically, which is unusual for enzymes. Typically, enzymes are made kind of on the spot, and then they are dissolved as soon as their job is done. So acinar cells are a little bit unusual in that they will store some enzymes for when they're needed. I just realized this isn't even on the slideshow. Let's make this look better. There we go. Now that's bigger. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay, so the pancreas is a really unique organ because it is both exocrine and endocrine. So what this means is that as an exocrine organ, it secretes. That's what exocrine means. It means it sends things outside of itself. It's also endocrine, which has to do with hormonal function, hormonal production, and then of course it also has digestive functions. So like the liver and gallbladder, it's secreting enzymes for fats. It also helps to digest proteins. Again, these enzymes are inactive. They'll hang out, and then there's kind of like a little call to action, and they rush to the front lines. The first one to be activated is called trypsin. This is the most powerful of the pancreatic enzymes, and then the others kind of follow behind it. So he's like, they bring out the big guns first instead of waiting for all the little guys. It produces insulin, so this is probably the most famous or infamous, depending how you look at it, function of the pancreas. So insulin helps to lower blood sugar or blood glucose concentration. So after you eat a carbohydrate of any kind, you have to produce insulin in order to get that carbohydrate into energy. Okay, so this makes sure that you're using carbohydrates first as the primary energy source before your fats and proteins are used. The pancreas also produces glucagon, which is kind of like the opposite of insulin. So while insulin lowers your blood glucose, glucagon increases your blood glucose. So this basically will help prevent you from having damage to your body by having low blood sugar. So it will produce some glucagon. Glucagon also mobilizes fat from your fat cells. So as opposed to making you store it, it's going to help get it out of there. And it also stimulates the synthesis of glucose, so actually making glucose and then releasing any stored glucose for use. So the glucagon is a little bit more specialized in terms of helping your body make glucose. And when I say that, I mean, for example, you can make glucose from fat. You can make glucose from proteins. It's not ideal. It's not as efficient as making glucose from carbohydrates, but it can be done. So glucagon would aid in that process. So people, for example, on like a keto diet or an extremely low carb diet are using a lot more glucagon than people eating carbohydrates because it's having to make that glucose from other fuel sources. I don't know why it doesn't want to advance. I'm stuck. I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay. It just froze on me. Sorry about that. Okay. So dysfunctions of the pancreas. So the first is going to be pancreatitis. So itis again. There we are. So this is an inflammation of the pancreas, inappropriate secretion of enzymes. So whether it's too much enzymes, usually when they're going to diagnose pancreatitis, they will test the pancreatic enzymes and they are usually extremely elevated. So it's like the pancreas is, because it's inflamed, it's in this like hyperactive state kind of. It can be caused by any number of things. Chronic excessive alcohol use, gallstones can cause it. There are people who are genetically predisposed to having pancreatitis. If you have very high triglycerides, and then certain types of infections. And then the more kind of commonly known dysfunction of the pancreas is diabetes. So there's two primary types of diabetes. Type 1, which was previously called juvenile diabetes or childhood diabetes. This is where the pancreas, the cells that produce insulin called beta cells, don't make enough insulin. Okay, so you have like a deficiency of insulin. This is typically diagnosed in childhood or adolescence, which is why it's called childhood diabetes, but sometimes you will see it. I've seen someone as old as like 32 years old get diagnosed with it, which I don't understand how that happens, but it does occasionally. But yeah, typically it's diagnosed at a very young age. Type 2, which is much more common, is where the body cells become resistant to insulin. Okay, so that's why you have heard the term insulin resistance. So normally what would happen is that the insulin would allow the glucose to enter, or rather, I'm sorry, the cells would allow insulin to enter them to help to break down that glucose. All right, but what happens with type 2 is that the cells are kind of like, it's like the gates are closed and the insulin can't get into where it needs to go. So this is why the blood sugar ends up, or why the glucose ends up in the blood, because it has nowhere else to go. It's like, well, if I can't go in the cells, I guess I'll just float around out here. So it's going to go into the bloodstream. So it's just circulating around. So when you're checking your blood sugar, that's what that means. That's how much glucose you have circulating in your bloodstream at that moment. Okay. It is typically onset by obesity. That is not always the case, but the majority of the time. There are countless studies and there's countless epidemiological research to support this, that there's a direct relationship between weight gain and type 2 diabetes. So, generally speaking, the treatment for type 2 diabetes is weight loss. Okay. Now type 2 can be diagnosed at any age. Unfortunately, we are seeing this happening at younger and younger ages over the past 20 years. I mean, children as young as like 5 and 6 years old are getting diagnosed, which is just horribly sad to me. But so the difference here is that type 2 diabetes is a reversible medical condition. So type 2 is not necessarily permanent if you take the steps to do what to change your lifestyle, lose weight if you need to lose weight. It is 100% a reversible condition. Type 1, unfortunately, is not. because it's an autoimmune disease, which attacks those pancreatic beta cells. Who knows? I mean, I guess they're researching this. Maybe it's sometime over the next couple of decades, there will be a cure for it. But as of right now, one does not exist. So people with type 2 diabetes have to take insulin injections. People with type 2 may or may not need to take insulin. It is of my professional opinion that insulin is not very useful for type 2s, because again, the problem isn't that you're not making enough insulin, it's that you're not able to use it. So I don't personally see the benefit or the point of just pumping more insulin into the body that isn't usable. It's like, if we keep putting more and more in there, maybe the cells will let more in, but there's really not a lot of evidence that helps. So insulin is not really the go-to for type 2s. It's more using medications that help to lower that insulin resistance, and then again with dietary measures. Okay, so let's talk about detoxification. Detox is kind of like a popular term that you hear. So let's talk about what that really, really means beyond kind of what you see in popular culture. So the detoxification is necessary to protect the body against various insults. Without it, we would literally die of poisoning right after we were born, okay? Because again, we're constantly bombarded with various toxins. So detoxification occurs in 2 phases of equal importance. We're going to get into some more details on that so you can kind of see the different steps. But it's important to remember that enzymes are made from proteins and are helped along by various vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. So some of the things that our liver needs to detoxify are selenium, which is an antioxidant. It needs something called glutathione, which is made from an amino acid. It needs vitamin C, B vitamins, amino acids, which come from protein, flavonoids, which are a type of antioxidant. We need zinc, copper, which are both what are called trace elements, trace minerals, sulfur, and choline. So if we don't have these materials that we need, if we're not getting them from our diet or we're not absorbing them from our diet, we cannot detoxify properly. So this is a nice little summary of the detoxification process. So you have your toxin, whatever it may be. All right, so step 1, these are all the nutrients that are required here. Okay, so some of the ones I already listed, carotenoids, which come from vitamin A. We need vitamin C. Step 2, you got a whole list of nutrients here needed, a lot of which are amino acids. You need sulfur. So sulfur is a big component of step 2, and that comes from certain things in your diet like garlic, cruciferous vegetables. This is a list of toxins. I mentioned some of these already, but also like pesticides, food additives, drugs, alcohol, etc. And then so step 2, it goes on to make them into water-soluble waste products so that they can be eliminated from the body. And you can see kind of the 2 main pathways of elimination are the gallbladder, the bile duct, and the bowel, right? Like we talked about last week. And then also the kidneys vis-a-vis urine. And that's another discussion that we will have in a subsequent week. So it goes through kind of 2 different mechanisms, either the kidneys or the gallbladder. So phase 1 is also called biotransformation. So this is where these harmful substances are broken down into like smaller pieces. So it starts deconstructing these elements. This is performed entirely by your liver enzymes. Again, with the help of those other nutrients and components we were talking about. Interestingly, most of these smaller components are still toxic. Okay, so phase 1, it's not enough to just go through phase 1. They're still toxic, they're just smaller, so that they're a little easier to work with. So they have to be converted in phase 2. All right. So I can't emphasize that enough. So it's important to make sure that both phases they're both working properly. Another thing that occurs in this phase is what are called binding sites. So binding sites are basically where the toxins will bind and be able to be carried out of the body. Okay. So you make these little sites. Processes that are at work here: oxidation, reduction, and then hydrolyzation, which basically means adding water molecules to it to help it to kind of dissolve. Again, here are some of the nutrients that are needed for that process. And then phase 2, this is where those little components are conjugated, which means added to be neutralized or stabilized. So one of those things. So they're either really unstable and could kind of like start wreaking havoc at any minute, or they are acidic or too alkaline or whatever. There's various things that means, but one of those two processes will happen. So either be neutralized or stabilized. And then so sometimes these components can be repurposed. So once they are no longer toxic, they may be actually useful. Like again, the estrogen, for example. So it may actually be sent to other organs if the organ can use that. So like, I don't know, I have very funny, I have a weird little brain, and I just think of like how this is working. I like personify these things, and I think of them calling, like the liver calls like, you know, the uterus and like, hey, I got this extra estrogen, like, do you guys need it? You know, I don't know. That's just what I think of. Or so if the other organs are like, no, we're good, we don't need that, then it can be eliminated. There's 6 main pathways here. Again, lots of big old words. But the 3 that I'll touch on are the glutathione pathway, which eliminates your heavy metals. It also eliminates any bacteria, any toxins from bacteria. So if you get food poisoning or an infection, those bacteria put off their own toxins. It's like their own byproducts. So you got to get rid of those. So glutathione helps with that. There's sulfation, which removes excess hormones. So this is where the estrogen example comes into play. You also can have excess neurotransmitters. So one example I can think of is if you have a situation where you're very scared or very high stress. Like, let's say if you I don't know, any situation that gets you very like nervous or upset, or like, let's say you get in a car accident or something, like that feeling that you have is like that fear kind of form. So these are this is adrenaline or norepinephrine being overproduced. And so the liver helps to like make that stop so that you're not constantly in this like stress state. So the liver helps to sort of remove those extra ones that we don't need anymore. And then finally, there's methylation. The methylation is also involved with excess estrogen. It helps eliminate metals. It also helps to remove histamines, which are what cause allergies. So histamines are what are released in response in an allergic reaction. And that's why you get hives and other things from that. But these 7 different systems are like multiple conveyor belts. So it's really cool where each belt has a specific substance on it and converting it into another one. So the factory analogy kind of comes to mind for me. Like things are kind of crisscrossing, going all different ways, but each one is a very specific set of substances. Okay, so what can affect these detoxification pathways? One big one are SSRIs. So these are anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications. These are very taxing to the liver. It can inhibit some of these pathways. Another one is antihistamines. So it's kind of funny. It's like, because again, the liver is supposed to be clearing those histamines, right? So it's like taking the antihistamine kind of makes the pathway lazy, maybe would be the way to look at it. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't take them ever, because sometimes you have, if you're having a hives outbreak or an asthma attack from allergic reaction, like if it's severe in that way, then obviously you need to quell that. But like, you should not be taking Benadryl on a daily basis or any kind of antihistamine like that. Stomach acid blockers. So here we are, back to the stomach again, back to how the digestive system can affect other systems. So if you're taking PPIs like omeprazole or Protonix, any of those things, because of that decreased stomach acid, your nutrients are not properly broken down or assimilated, and then the liver doesn't have what it needs. Grapefruit can actually inhibit detoxification enzymes. So this is not to say don't eat grapefruit. You just should not be eating very large quantities of them. It also interacts with like hundreds of medications. So you need to be aware of what grapefruit can interact with, so that you're not having this effect on the liver. Trauma, whether it's physical or emotional trauma. Anybody who's studied Eastern medicine or any type of mind-body medicine will know that the liver is always what is looked at for that stored trauma or that stored emotional energy. Okay, so we do know even in Western medicine that trauma can affect them. Inflammation in general, if your microbiome is unhealthy, right? So there's another checkpoint for the gut. Eating well done or charred meats. I really need y'all to know this. So what happens here is that it ramps up phase 1, which again is still producing toxic substances, and it slows down phase 2. So you're breaking down the toxins into smaller toxins, and phase 2 cannot process them fast enough. And so they end up actually remaining in the body. Okay, so this is another really good reason to not eat your meat well done. That is primarily why they say that contributes to cancer risk, because of the compounds that are produced and then not able to be eliminated on time. So let's talk a little more about where these toxins come from. Because again, as I said before, the word toxin is a very broad term. So what are we talking about here? Largely it's from our external environment. So there's those xenobiotics again. So any foreign substances and chemicals that enter the body. So pollution, plastics, microplastics. You guys are probably hearing a lot about microplastics in the news now. That's kind of the new scary thing. Heavy metals and pesticides, recreational drugs, of course, any medication, because again, remember, anything that you swallow, inject, drink is going to go to the liver. Growth hormones in meat and dairy products. So the animals are generally given growth hormones to either make the meat bigger or more tender. In the case of dairy, it's given to the animals to help them produce more milk. Certain food additives and preservatives. So like food colorings are a big example, and also oxidized fats. So oxidized fats essentially come from frying foods or, heating oils to very high temperatures, especially if those oils are not meant to be heated at those high temperatures. So you need to be real careful with that. Chemical coatings on your cookware. This is kind of like a little homework assignment I would like everyone to do at some point between now and next week, is go look at your cookware, see if it's got Teflon on it. Because if it's got Teflon, it's got PFAS, those forever chemicals. That is exactly what they are made of. So that's definitely a point to consider. If you are using these Teflon containing products, I would highly recommend considering, yes, your air fryer too. Thank you, Connie. Air fryers can also be coated with Teflon. So you need to do research on your air fryer and make sure it also does not contain those things. Pathogens from food or water, or from that dysbiosis, that bacterial imbalance. These can also generate toxins as waste byproducts. And then also toxins can be passed from breast milk into infants. So anything that's in the mother is breastfeeding the infant, those are all going to be passed into the infant as well. Okay, so with I want to build a little more on the impaired liver thing, so sort of the consequences of this impairment or this dysfunction. Of course, that ability to detoxify is going to be impaired. A damaged liver impacts other organs. We've sort of already touched on this a little bit. The digestive system, clearly, the gallbladder and pancreas. So you're disrupting that whole dynamic. The heart and circulatory system, the kidneys, the skin, and the eyes. Because any number of toxins not able to be conjugated or eliminated by the liver can also go to these other organs. Okay. If the liver is impaired, this can prevent weight loss because it will start storing that excess fat. And when excess fat is being stored, the metabolism is slowing down because the liver is anticipating needing those stores, and therefore that something is going to happen, like you're not going to have food. So this is a very old kind of evolutionary mechanism from when, you know, our ancestors, our primitive ancestors who would go long periods of time without food. And so the fat is stored, the metabolism is slowed in anticipation of that happening. So it hasn't caught up to our modern sort of our modern practices yet. So this is still what it thinks is happening. Nutrient deficiencies, particularly those fat soluble vitamins, can occur. And then having fatty liver, if you don't treat fatty liver, it can also increase your risk of diabetes. It can increase your risk of heart disease, including heart attacks, and kidney disease. Okay, so it's almost like I almost like need to make a map of this, and like as we go through this, like start connecting the different points on the map so that you guys can really see this. But clearly the liver will impact various other organs and systems. Okay, so what are some of the nutritional factors that can impact liver health? Excessive protein intake, and by that I mean you have to eat a lot of protein for this to be a problem. Or unless you're not using the protein you're ingesting in the first place. So if the protein is not being broken down properly in the stomach, that will still create that state of excess protein. Okay, excess sugars and simple carbohydrates. So sugar is converted into triglycerides, and then they are stored as fat in the liver. So high triglycerides are a major risk factor for heart disease, more so than say LDL, which is usually the ones that's being kind of thrown under the bus, which we're learning some new things about LDL now. But triglyceride, pretty much across the board, big risk factor for heart disease. The excess intake of unhealthy fats, in other words, an imbalance of your omega-6 to your omega-3. So again, if you're eating a lot of these, a lot of fried foods with those oxidized oils, if you're not eating enough fatty fish and avocados and nuts, you create this imbalance of your fatty acids, and that can impact the liver. General overeating, because the liver is not meant to constantly accommodate food intake. Like your metabolism and your digestive system and your liver are meant to sort of accept meals. Like it expects that you're going to eat a certain amount of food at a certain time and then not eat again for several hours. I mean, we are more or less programmed. So you're not meant to be snacking constantly and kind of grazing, as they call it. You're not meant for that. So it can stress the liver, it can stress the pancreas. And then it's an unfortunate fact that a lot of our food no longer contains the natural enzymes that they used to have. So agriculturally speaking, the soil is not healthy. The soil doesn't have the microbes and the enzymes that they used to have, or the nutrients. And so this can kind of affect the enzyme content of our foods. So raw foods like raw fruits and vegetables have more enzymes, but they're also harder to digest sometimes. So, you know, you can't necessarily eat all raw vegetables all the time. That might be too much for your digestion. Microwaving and cooking food for too long can destroy the enzymes in food. So basically you want to cook it for as short of a time as you can, and not in the microwave, you know. So steaming your vegetables, that's pretty quick, or like what I call broth sauteing. So you just put some kind of broth in the pan with your herbs and your seasonings and cook the vegetables for a couple of minutes. So cook it as short as you can get away with. Plus, to me, they taste better that way. I can't stand overcooked mushy vegetables. Okay, so some other factors. We already talked about alcohol. First and foremost, we need to remember that alcohol is a toxin. You know, what is the word that we use for people being drunk? They are intoxicated, the word being toxic in there. Okay, so alcohol is a toxin. It creates inflammation in the liver. A glass of wine here and there, not a big deal. Okay, but you should not be drinking every day, certainly not more than one drink. Even if you don't feel like it's an issue for you, quote unquote, you need to still remember that it is a toxin. Excess use of medications, street drugs, and so on. Again, pretty much all drugs go through the liver. NSAIDs in particular, like Tylenol, can be a problem. they hit the liver pretty hard. So you need to be careful, in addition to possibly giving you stomach ulcers and that sort of thing. Environmental toxins like pesticides and heavy metals. We talked about the stress and the emotional issues and the trauma. Okay, so over time, if you're not managing your stress or you're continuously in a traumatic situation, like in an abuse state, for example, very impactful on the liver. Lack of exercise. So let's not forget that exercise in and of itself is kind of a detoxification, because sweat is another way that we eliminate toxins through our body and our lungs as well. So the liver is basically working overtime to eliminate what you should be doing with sweating. Okay, so you need to sweat. That's important. And then other illnesses and diseases that can impact liver function are things like obesity, viruses, allergies, diabetes, that sort of thing. Okay, so ways that you can support your liver. Obviously, again, we can't avoid all toxic substances, but control the things that you can. All right, look at your cleaning products, look at your cookware, look at your personal care products. Limit your alcohol intake. That's one thing you can 100% control. There is a really cool app for your phone called Think Dirty, which can actually help you identify toxic products and then find better replacements. I mean, I could literally do an entire hour of a talk on just this thing here of like making over your household products. Again, if that's something you guys are interested in, that we could certainly offer that. So let Connie know if you would like to see that. We can do a whole workshop on kind of detoxifying your house and replacing some of your household products. Limit your use of plastic, okay? Because even if you aren't directly ingesting plastic, those microplastics can still leach into your foods, into your drinks. Definitely don't ever leave a plastic bottle in a hot car, because that's a pretty surefire way that you're going to get some of these substances from the plastic into your drink. So do not ever leave a plastic anything in your car. Some herbal support that you can do. These are some different ones. Milk thistle is a really great one. There's a lot of clinical evidence to back this up. So I recommend milk thistle to all my patients that have fatty liver or any other evidence of impaired detoxification. If there's seems to be any kind of like infection, wormwood is a great one. Garlic is a really great antimicrobial naturally, and garlic is pretty easy to incorporate into your cooking. You can also use digestive bitters. These are like different types of herbs that can help detoxification. They can also help with your digestive function. And again, sweating, exercising, sauna, all right, are both really great ways to do that. Connie just threw up a couple points as well. Number one, not using, if you are going to microwave, don't microwave in those steamer bags. I don't care what the steamer bags say. They're like, microwave in the bag. Do not microwave in the bag. Please do not. Dump it in a bowl. It takes you 2 seconds. Put it in a not plastic bowl, like a glass bowl would be great. And if you have to microwave it, do it that way. Also avoid like plastic cutting boards, because every time you're cutting on that plastic board, you're making those tiny little cuts, and that's releasing microplastics. So use a wooden cutting board or glass or something like that, something not plastic. So really, really try to eliminate plastic wherever you can. Nutritionally speaking, there's a lot of foods that you can incorporate or avoid to help support the liver. Number one is cruciferous vegetables. These are like numero uno, all right? So broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, these are very rich in antioxidants. They're also rich in those sulfur molecules that the liver needs for that detoxification process. Leafy green vegetables are also a great source. Mushrooms of various kinds, citrus fruits, and green tea. Okay, so these are kind of some of your power players here. Wild caught fish only. So you should not be eating any farm-raised fish. And the reason for this is that farm-raised fish are in obviously a much smaller area. They're usually in like an artificially created pond or lake or something like that. So it's a more concentrated area. So any toxins that are accumulating or that are present are going to be accumulating in the water and therefore ingested by those fish. Where if they're swimming out in the big vast ocean, the concentration is much lower of those things. Okay, so wild caught only. In terms of organic, it may not be feasible to eat organic everything. So if you have to focus on something, meats and dairy products, because again, pesticides in particular store in the fat. So they're going to store in the fat from the animals as well. All right. You literally are what you eat. It trickles up the food chain. So if nothing else, organic grass-fed meats, organic dairy products. Avoid heating in plastic, like we just talked about. Avoid frying foods because of those oxidized fats that can be created. If you want, you can saute with olive oil a little bit. Like if you like that with your vegetables, that's totally fine, because olive oil is okay for low heat cooking. But really try to avoid frying in general. Limit the microwave use. Eat a mix of raw and cooked foods, okay, so that you're getting the benefits, the enzymes from the raw foods and the nutrients, but cooking to also make it a little easier to digest. And certain nutrients actually are improved when you cook. So like certain antioxidants in tomatoes, for example, are not released until you cook the tomatoes. So there's benefit in both. Limit your alcohol and your added sugar intake. You might need to take those digestive enzymes, especially if you don't have a gallbladder. All right. You can also consider something called taurine, which will help you to make more bile. So that's another good support for impaired liver or absence of gallbladder. All right, so again, foods that support detoxification, here's a list. And then this also shows the substances that they contain that support the liver. So cruciferous vegetables, again, have that sulfur. They have those glutathione precursors. So they have the building blocks to make that very powerful aid in detoxification. Vitamin C is a big one, big antioxidant in the diet. Okay, citrus fruits are a great source of that. They also have some antioxidants called flavonoids. Nuts and seeds are good sources of those trace minerals. So again, those are important for phase 1 of your detoxification. Magnesium is like a helper molecule that helps the body to convert things from one thing to the other, basically. Seafood are a great source of healthy fats, proteins, those trace elements like zinc and iron. And then free-range eggs, great source of choline. Oops. Another thing needed for that detoxification in phase 2, vitamin A, selenium, which are both antioxidants, and then vitamin D. But the reason I say free range is because, as I mentioned before, with the food chain and that trickle up effect, anything that those chickens ate are also going into you, and it goes into their eggs. And so free range chickens are generally going to be eating healthier diets. They're first of all, they're getting exercise. They're eating a more natural diet that they should be eating, which is, so they're foraging, they're eating bugs, and they're eating, a lot of times they'll give them like food scraps, like kitchen fruit and vegetable scraps, different types of, things like that. So you really want the free range eggs, because healthier chickens will make healthier eggs. Okay, let's touch on cholesterol, because I think this is a big controversy, and there's a lot of misunderstandings surrounding cholesterol. So the liver makes its own cholesterol. All right. And we don't need to eat cholesterol. Like there's no dietary requirement for cholesterol. So if the liver is working properly, it's making it for you. So the main job of cholesterol is act like a Band-Aid. So it will repair any damage that happens in the body. So it kind of like plugs holes, okay? Or if there's any like damage to the cells, cholesterol will go and plug it. So it is made of these lipoproteins that also act as fat carriers. So lipoproteins kind of deliver fats where they need to go. So your HDL, which is also known as your good cholesterol, is like a scavenger. So it goes and it picks up cholesterol from places it doesn't need to be, like in the arteries, for example. So this is why you want to see a higher HDL level on a lipid panel, because the more HDL you have, the more ability you have to scavenge that excess cholesterol from other places where it doesn't need to go. And it actually carries them back to the liver. Okay. Cholesterol is often monitored as a heart disease risk factor, but ironically, the liver is really not examined too much. So if you show up with high LDL or high bad cholesterol, it's very seldom that your doctor is going to be like, oh yeah, let's run a liver panel too. They just don't. They immediately just slap you on a drug, usually to help lower it. But it's also important to know that this LDL, or quote, bad cholesterol, this is more of an indicator. Okay, so this means that there is some damage somewhere or a high state of inflammation somewhere that needs correcting. All right, and so again, you want that number to be a little bit lower and the HDL to be a little bit higher to help to keep that balance. There is some new research coming out about LDL and how it's not as dangerous as we thought it was, but that science is still kind of developing, so I'm not going to speculate too much on that. But the point is to have that HDL number up. So statin drugs, which are extremely common, I read a statistic the other day that like 35% of people in America are adults in America are on a statin drug. 35%, like that's a lot. And it was saying that only about half of those people need to be on them. So they're very overprescribed. So they are commonly used to lower cholesterol. They work by blocking the production and absorption of cholesterol. So they suppress the liver's ability to make cholesterol, which is not necessarily a good thing. Okay, so because they will also lower your good cholesterol. And so again, you're losing your ability to scavenge that excess cholesterol from places where it should be going. So it's sort of ironic to me that you're taking away the one thing that could actually help remove cholesterol from the body, right? The other thing with statin drugs is they can negatively impact hormones, they can impact digestion, and they can affect vitamin D levels. So anybody who knows me knows I am not a fan of statins. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't say a whole lot else, but just know I'm not a fan. And if someone is showing up with an abnormal lipid panel, my first line of defense is the diet, trying to get that HDL number up in order to help to mitigate any risk level. And yes, Connie, you're right about that. Like there are subcategories of LDL. So some are fine, some are a little bit more harmful. There's a new test that they're doing called LPA, lipoprotein A, that you can ask for. And this is really going to be a better indicator of what your heart disease risk is from your cholesterol levels. So if the next time you're going to go have it done, I would recommend having your LPA checked. So again, that's one of these little carrier fats here, or carrier proteins. Okay. So that's that. All right, let me go. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen for right now. I'm gonna go into the chat and see if you guys have typed any questions in there. All right, let's see. Okay, somebody asked about what brand of digestive enzymes. There's a lot of really good ones out there. It kind of depends on what you need, right? So if you're a person without a gallbladder, for example, you're going to need one that's going to be richer in the gallbladder enzymes. If you're someone who just kind of has general digestive issues and you can't really pinpoint anything specific, I like the Now Foods. I'm going to type it in the chat here. The Now Foods Super Enzymes is a really good one. It's an affordable one. It's good quality. It's third-party tested, and it has the gallbladder enzymes. It has the all the enzymes needed to break down proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. It doesn't have all the pancreatic ones. So again, if you have pancreas issues, I'd probably have you take a separate pancreatic enzymes on top of that. But the Now Foods Super Enzyme is a really good. It also has the bile extract in it. So it also provides that bile that your gallbladder would be otherwise providing. So super enzymes is a really good one. I like that one. There is also a plant-based version of that does not have the ox bile. So for those of anybody here who's avoiding animal products, they also make a plant enzyme by that same brand. So you can do that one as well. But again, that's not quite as effective just because it's lacking that bile extract.
Would you recommend that even if you don't have digestive issues, that enzymes would be a good way to make sure you're getting all the nutrients?
I can't hear you very well. Sorry, you're really quiet.
Hang on. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. What is your take on enzymes for even if you don't have any known digestive issues?
Um,
I'm just thinking that it's a good I don't know support because a lot of our it's just so hard to break down everything already to get nutrients that the enzymes might add an extra layer of support.
I mean, I don't know that there's any evidence of benefit, but I also don't think it would hurt necessarily because the way enzymes work, you know, again, your body will, some of them will be stored, like the ones in your pancreas, but anything that it doesn't need is going to immediately be broken down. So it's not like you're going to accumulate excess levels of enzymes in your body. Like that's not going to cause any harm whatsoever. So you can, but you know, if you don't really feel like you have any digestive issues, you don't have any of the symptoms we've talked about so far, which I doubt. Like I feel like most people have something going on, but enzymes are a pretty good first line of defense. So like that's usually something I start with as opposed to more expensive or more intense supplements. Like the enzymes are a good one to start with to kind of see how you respond.
Well, I've used them even as an as-needed situation when you might have a meal out doesn't agree with you. I keep them in my purse.
Oh, same. Yeah, you can definitely do that. Like especially like
You know,
yeah, if you're gonna go eat something you don't normally eat, like if you maybe are gonna have a more high fat meal or a more sugary meal, or you're gonna eat some dairy where you don't normally eat a lot of dairy, then yeah, that would be a good opportunity to do that. And I do the same. I literally have a baggie of them in my purse. So you and I are the same brand of weirdo. And because, you know, and my friends all know, they're like, all right, Jane, take your pills, you know. So yeah, so it's not a bad idea in those situations. So you wouldn't necessarily need to take them every day, but yeah, you could have them kind of as backup. Okay. And Janelle also was asking if digestive enzymes would interact with medications, and the answer is no, because again, these are things that your body would be producing anyway. So there's no issue with that. Now, I will say with some of the herbal stuff that I mentioned, you do need to check your prescription medications and see if there's any sort of reaction potentially with, because herbs, you know, we can't assume that just because an herb is natural or just because something is natural that it's not harmful in any way. That's just not, that's called the appeal to nature fallacy. That's just not true. You know, plenty of, we know that poison ivy exists and venomous spiders exist, and you know what I mean? So there's obviously plants that can very much harm you. So what I'm going to do is I will send you guys a link to use. There is a really good online checker that you can use to check interactions for that sort of thing. So like you can put in the medication you're taking, you can put in the name of the herb or the supplement, and it will tell you if there's going to be any potential reaction, because that's really important to know. You could really do yourself more harm than good if you're just blindly popping supplements and you don't really know what you're doing or what the effects could be. So I will send that to you guys so you have a good reference to use for yourselves. So I'll send that in your email. All right. So we are about at the end, but if there's any, I could take maybe one more question, unless, let me make sure I've answered everything that everybody was talking about. Looks like everything so far that was in the chat. So again, if you guys have any questions later, you're free to email me. This recording will be sent out to you later in the week. Hopefully you've got week 1 already. And thank you again to everybody for joining us tonight. I will see you guys back here next Wednesday for round 3.
Thank you so much. You guys have a good night.
Good night, y'all.